Okay. Our main presentation is Dr. James LaValle. LaValle or Laval? LaValle. Okay. I am familiar with James from a lot of his writing, and also we're both CCNs, so with the International American Association of Clinical Nutritionists. James LaValle, R.Ph., CCN, and ND, has 18 plus years of clinical practice experience in the field of natural therapeutics and functional medicine. He received his license in pharmacology from the University of Cincinnati College of Pharmacy, certification as a certified clinical nutritionist from the International and American Associations of Clinical Nutritionists, and his Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine from Central States College of Health Sciences. He is currently in clinical practice at the Laval Metabolic Institute. He is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Dietary Supplement Education Alliance, is an adjunct professor in the College of Pharmacy at the University of Cincinnati, and serves as preceptor in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. He is the author of 14 books, the latest being Cracking the Metabolic Code, and is an adjunct professor in the College of Pharmacy, University of Cincinnati. And he'll be speaking about tonight the metabolic code method for prevention and wellness in the 21st century. Dr. LaValle.
That'd be great. Yeah. I'm Italian. I got to move around a lot. And I know the drill. All right. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. Ready? We're all good? Okay. All right. Well, you've got some great speakers coming up. I mean, you don't want to miss Ari Vajani. I can tell you that right now. Ari is fantastic, really gets the immune system, and you'll learn a lot from Ari. So, what we're going to talk about tonight. What I've spent the last, actually, 30 years doing is researching what goes on with your metabolism, and why do we stay well, or why does somebody end up sick? And that's rooted in about 200 patients a week at my institute. Actually, in the last year and a half, 2 years, I moved and let my doctors take my institute over because they were just tired of me being around. So you need to leave and let us learn how to work on people. And I've done that. And but most importantly, it's gaining a perspective on the fact that, you know, people's chemistries become dysfunctional for a lot of reasons. And it isn't always so linear as we'd like to think it is. Even in the natural medicine world, we have this, we think is this linearity to illness. And what I want to do is maybe dispel a little bit of that. And I do want to share with you a little bit of what I have been doing lately. The first thing, that project I took on was this project with a company called Lifetime Fitness. And the reason it's important to me, it was the opportunity to design a program to promote health to about 1 million people. And it's easy to promote health to one person sitting in front of you at a time, but when you have to start thinking about impacting 1.2 million members at 120 locations and train 2,400 trainers and now about 75 dietitians, you start going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now, right? Because it's really easy when you've been doing it for 30 years and you can sit in front of somebody one-on-one. But the bottom line to this is what we really did was try to train people to understand that the big culture for them was how do we get people to lose weight and keep weight off? And not only that, just because you lose weight, it doesn't mean that you're healthy. So how do you feel vital and maintain your metabolism? And that was the big query for us to try to figure out if we could do that. And so we created self-care labs for people, so people could get their, a lab test done, and we could look at things like their, what's called an NMR lipid profile. So look at things like particle size of their lipids, and look at their cortisol levels, and look at their glucose and insulin ratios, and look at their red blood cell magnesium, and really develop a way to say what is going on. Look at their white blood cell counts to find out if their immune system was activated or not, right? And really start to say, where are you broke? Where and not why are you broke? Because we need counseling, and we probably need a couple shaman and a few dead chickens that are flung around in order to figure all that out. But I mean, we can't necessarily get to the why all the time, right? But we can at least get to the where pretty quickly, right? And so what's happened is a couple 100,000 people have gone through that program, and we've gotten some pretty dramatic results. So from the standpoint of weight loss and reports on subjective surveys of their vitality index going up, it's been pretty significant. So that was pretty neat. The other thing that was really fun for me, that's the Lifetime Fitness headquarters, was this deal. So we got called by Corvette Racing. And I've worked on Olympic athletes, worked on a bunch of different athletes. And so what happens when you're an athlete and you're working at very high speed, so a skier going down a hill at 75 miles an hour, I asked the junior Olympic training coach, I said, what's the difference between first and 10th place? If you don't fall. If you fall, it's easy, right? But what's the difference between first and 10th place? He said, 2 gates with a decision on how tightly they make their turn. And somebody pointed to their head. It's called brain coherence. And so what we did was we took Corvette race drivers and we evaluated their chemistries, all right? And when we evaluated their chemistries, we saw where, for example, one of the race drivers was gluten intolerant. We tested his immune system. He had a pretty serious gluten intolerance. Well, what do you do before a 24-hour endurance race? You're going to carb up. You're going to eat a lot of carbs. What would he end up doing in his races over the last couple of years? Wreck a lot. Why is he wrecking a lot? He's going into turn 3, and he knows he should be turning, but his brain's, is that a turn? Should I turn? Right? Or the other message is your brain is screaming, turn, 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 turn. But the signal, the firing from your brain to your muscle is, maybe I'll turn. Oops, I wrecked. Oops, I spun out. And so you've all seen this with runners going across a marathon. If you see them finishing a marathon, right? People are running all gallant and beautiful. They're running, they hit the finish line, and what happens to their body? They do this stuff, right? They can't control because their mind pushed them to the end, but at the end, their core body temperature got up so high, and their brain became incoherence failed, right? And so what we did on these guys is we had them swallow a little telemetry pill, and we measured core body temperature. And then what we did was we actually designed an extract that they did intranasally. It was from ginseng. And what we were trying to do is stop their brain from becoming hyperactivated, right? Because what happens is your brain gets heated up and you have what's called glial cells. And the microglial cells turn on and create inflammatory cytokines. But your body doesn't have any mechanisms to turn them off real quick. So you release a lot of IL-6, interleukin-6, which when you look at any form of exercise, the thing that causes your body to fail is an excessive production of the cytokine IL-6, interleukin-6. And so what I figured was, well, if I could keep those glial cells from getting activated, I might have a chance at keeping their brain from overheating. And then I got to get them out of the car. And when I get them out of the car, I got to get their brain to calm down to the point where they can rest. So so that was using sublingual theanine is what we did. So we would pump this spray in them before they got in the car, and they would be alert, but calm and focused. They'd get out of the car, they'd get acupuncture done to them. We give them theanine sublingually. They would sleep for their 2 hours in the back of the 24 hours of Le Mans, and in the end, I hope I hit the right button. They won Le Mans. So we took a team that was totally bombing on a race circuit where they spend, you know how much money they spend on that car right there? You know how many engineers work on a single race car? It's about 52 engineers will be working doing telemetry and calculations on that car to make it run around a track. You know how much money they spend on a race car driver? About a 6-pack of Red Bulls. That's what they did before we came into them, all right? Now, I'm going to fast forward this. It's not just the race driver that's happening to. It's all of us that are either in an acute crisis situation or we're chronically driving our chemistry that way. Now, how's that happen? That's the other step. What I did with Lifetime Fitness was I went and I started to measure things like cortisol, look at blood pressure, and start to put together, well, are they hyperactivated? Are they hyperaroused? Because what I noticed when I interviewed trainers that were under the age of 40, I'm in a room like this, 30% of them reported short-term memory loss already. Because when you overtrain, you begin to shrink your brain. I mean, we'll get to that in a minute. But the point being is that in everyday people's lives, these same principles are occurring. It's not just the elite athlete. The elite athlete just accelerates their damage. So a lot of these guys in Corvette, they were marathon runners to go with it, which I'll show you a little bit about marathon runners in a minute. So, this was obviously the kind of, I just have to put this slide up a lot because I love it. It's pharma's new enemy, clean living, throw out your Prozac, your Nexium, and your Ambien. Instructions are inside. Look, there's no doubt about it, we've over-medicated. Everybody admits it. It's not, look, I've taught 17 years now at medical school and pharmacy school. I'm on the board at A4M. I lecture all over the place, and I can go to conventional schools and talk about it, or I can go to a more open forum and talk about it, and everybody agrees. We've simply over-medicated, and we haven't. The other piece to medication is just this, and we talked about it before the talk today, is that a lot of people don't realize if I give you a medication right now, he comes to me, he goes, you know what I really do? I'm not thinking sharp. I'm not feeling like myself. I'm a little gassy too, and it's kind of embarrassing me. I need something to take. I want a medication. If you take that medication, and if the next day I don't get a call, and he says, you know what, I've got a rash, and it's kind of, well, it's only on 50% of my body right now. Well, that's an allergic reaction. So we go, okay, that drug's not such a good thing for this individual because he took it, broke out in a rash. Or he calls up and goes, I don't think I can talk real good. My tongue is getting very thick. Allergic reaction. But the thing that's missed is if he's on a drug that's depleting a nutrient, for example, CoQ10, magnesium, that could deplete tyrosine. Oral contraceptives deplete B6. When you deplete B6, you don't make serotonin. 19 to 56% of women who take oral contraceptives get depressed within a year of taking oral contraceptives. It's a physiochemical thing. It's called drug-induced nutrient depletion. And if we don't account for it, we don't recognize it. And if it's a year after you start your medication, you're not looking at the drug and going, oh, it's the drug. That's one of the kind of book series that a colleague of mine and I wrote on for quite a few years and still create the databases for it. So it's important to realize that medication, I believe that medication is valuable. I also believe that medication is way overused. People that are in a life or death situation, I can guarantee you right now, echinacea is probably not going to fix them if they've got a meningitis, right? At the same time, I tell people, you never have a Lipitor deficiency, and you never have a ginkgo deficiency either, right? So but you do have core nutrient deficiencies that can mess up your body. So we got to just kind of keep it all in perspective. I like this. This is the Affordable Care Act. This is a great quote by David Katz. Because physicians aren't trained in nutrition, right? And so finally, primary care providers are supposed to recommend diet and lifestyle counseling to patients. Right? This is from the Huffington Post, right? There are two ways physicians muck up weight management counseling: by providing it and not providing it. Right? Because they don't know anything about it, so it's a mess when they try it. And of course, when they don't provide it, I can't tell you how many people. I just interviewed some physicians on it because one of my big areas is metabolic syndrome that I really am passionate about. And I talk to docs and I'm like, well, if somebody's only 20 pounds overweight, I don't really like to talk to them about their weight problem. Okay, but you won't mind talking to them about their chronic kidney disease or their cancer or their type 2 diabetes. but you're uncomfortable talking to them about the fact they need to lose 20 pounds. I'm sorry, I don't get the logic. I mean, why am I so comfortable in that space, right? And you know, once again, you know, we've got this Accountable Care Act. Once again, we just don't have a lot of prevention going on that's oriented at really getting to the heart of illness. And so I think it's kind of funny. So for me, it's all about this. It's all about how bad do I want that cheese, right? How bad is, you know, man, I have got, this is the latest in concussion technology helmet designed for the NFL. Well, and for soccer, right? I mean, or for any sport for that matter, right? Because, you know, and I just got to have that cheese. It's all about your benefit and risk. What are you willing to do? What are the consequences? And that works both ways. I mean, I know people that take their health so seriously that their seriousness about their health is driving their dysfunction. Right? I mean, that's without a doubt. You know? And then at the same time, I would say most people are in the other category. They don't quite take their health seriously enough. Oh, it's okay if I'm a little overweight. If I just will myself to be better, I'll be okay. Well, measure your... I always tell people the first time I talked you know, I went and I talked at a group, and I was at basically it was a New Age festival. It was back in 1985, right? And nobody wanted to listen about nutrition, right? And you know, so I got up, and what I was talking about is, hey, you know, take control. And I was pretty into the etheric side and energy side of medicine because one of my mentors was coming back from Baden-Baden and doing a lot of work with frequency work and all that. So I mean, I was tuned into it. But you know, I still go back to the old story of, you know what, you can think you can will anything, but I'm going to get, and if anybody, are there people here that can will anything to happen to their body? Maybe. So if I can get a volunteer, I've got a roll of duct tape, and I'm going to tape your mouth shut and your nose shut, and you show me how you can will yourself to breathe through your ears, and I'm going to be really cool with knowing that really works. Nobody's passed that yet. Not once. Now, and I'm into positive thinking. Let me tell you, I really think it. But there's physical laws that take place too, and you got to understand that. And so the real thing, this is no big surprise for you guys. You're incredibly forward thinking. I can tell just by the pre-show. I can tell you're all forward thinking. But for me, what I had to break it down was, what are the things that influence my life? And what are the things that influence a person's life in front of me? First of all, without a doubt, it is diet. Diet's important. You know, does it mean you have to eat a certain way? You know, I mean, look, if I'm an Eskimo, I have to eat a certain way, and I seem to be fairly long-lived. But if I'm over in the Mediterranean, I seem to eat a certain way, and I'm fairly long-lived. And if I'm in Russia, I can be fairly long-lived. But the point being is that there's some baseline things about diet. We all agree that you can't eat a gallon of ice cream a day. And we all right? I mean, you can't eat a gallon of ice cream a day and think you're not going to affect your glucose at some point. So diet is different, and diet may not be exactly right for everybody the same way because of our gene pool's different. So we talked about the microbiome at the beginning of our talk. How we eat dramatically influences the microbiome, without a doubt. How you're going to process your estrogens, how you're going to release inflammatory chemicals in your gut that circulate in your whole body. It all relates to the kind of food you eat. The next piece is genetics, and you know what? We're at an incredible precipice because we really don't know. I mean, there's a huge argument going on about how important genes are right now. Because what half of the scientific community is saying is, well, first of all, it isn't a gene most of the time. Even in Parkinson's, for example, if you look at Parkinson's, it is a combination of what's called an ApoE SNP, which relates to your ability to detoxify, and then it's two other genes, Parkin and alpha-synuclein, which relate to getting rid of proteins in your neurons and the dopaminergic beds of your substantia nigra of your brain, which is where Parkinson's attacks. And if you have those three genes turned on, meaning you've got alleles for them, SNPs, you're positive, you're 13 times more likely to become a Parkinson's case. Other than that, Parkinson's, it's an environmental issue for most people, right? So it's not always, oh, it's this gene or that gene. It's what's the metabolomic expression? What are the chemicals coming out of your body because your genes have been turned on? It's called the metabolome or the proteome. And so there's still a lot of there's a lot of disharmonic information related to genetics. But I would say that, man, are we going to learn a lot over the next 50 years about genes. And look, the microbiome. How many genes are in the microbiome? There's 1 million genes in our microbiome. So the gut living in us has 1 million genes. You know how many, we're at 20,000. What is it, 24,000? Yeah, depending on who, So we got 1 million invaders laying off DNA, right? And there are cohabitants, but we can tick them off really well depending on what we decide to do. What else? Prescription drugs I talked about. Exercise, I'm going to give you a glimpse at that. What I also found when I worked with all these hundreds of thousands of people that are training, people that don't exercise at all and people that exercise too much, it's the bell curve. They look a lot alike biochemically. Almost identically. It's the same. I mean, it's there. There's excessive oxidative stress, there's glucose issues. The only difference is the person that doesn't train at all and maybe has metabolic syndrome, they're the obvious one. They're sitting there, they're overweight, they don't have energy. You look at the person that's the world-class overtrained athlete and you go, oh my gosh, they look fantastic, right before they have their heart attack and die. So the thought of there's a sweet spot for your exercise and how your body is going to repair, rejuvenate, and actually, I call it redeem itself, is interesting. And then spiritual base, I just think you got to have something greater than yourself. I don't particularly care how you get there, but I think it's great if you can get to a place of understanding service and commitment and community, right? And then existing disease, what do you have? What did you have? How's that influencing you? How's that influencing your attitude and your belief system, right? If I have cancer, does that mean I'm doomed? If I have an autoimmune disease, does that mean I have to be fearful of a rheumatoid arthritis, fearful of walking, fearful of movement? Environmental exposures. A huge, I think, we're just now really understanding how important that is. And then, of course, what we're going to talk about now is psychogenic stress, because to me, psychogenic stress is probably one of the most powerful things physiologically. I'm not talking about emotionally. We know it emotionally can cripple us, but I mean physiologic change that literally destroys neural regeneration in your brain, right? So we're going to talk about that. And what's the life cycle of this? This is what for years I just hear this over and over again. It's not the person that stood in front of me that had an osteosarcoma or an oat cell cancer in their lung, that's the easy stuff. The doctor, sends the report and they've got it. It's the person that goes, I'm fatigued. My energy crashes in the middle of the day unless I get a triple rock star or stop at Starbucks and get a quad Americano and use the little, what's kind of cool now, you can get a single. And they started doing this. They have caffeine sprinkles at Starbucks. You can just shake cap. You guys haven't seen the caffeine sprinkles? Everybody's like, I'm going to Starbucks, man. I want to see if they got those caffeine sprinkles. Insomnia or lack of sleep. It's rampant that people don't sleep enough. And it's very clear, the evidence of how long you need to sleep. You could be an exceptional person. There are exceptions to every rule, but in general, the studies are quite clear that 7 to 9 hours of sleep are very protective. And 6 hours is the window that nobody wants to study, because I think all the researchers only sleep 6 hours and they don't want to find out how bad it is. And then they study 5 hours of sleep, which is 9 times more likely to get a flu bug. 3 times as likely to become diabetic. I can, more at risk for heart disease. I can go on and on and on about people that don't they only get 5 hours sleep. The other part of it is when you get your 7 to 9 hours sleep is, do you sleep deep and do you feel rested when you wake up in the morning? Well, yeah, as long as I use my Ambien and drink a couple cocktails. that's what people think is getting good sleep. That's not getting good sleep, right? And then of course it's foggy headedness, what I call, jello brain, right? It's like when I talk to people and I said, do you feel like you have to push your thought through jello? And they go, yeah. Okay, at least you heard me. That's good. And of course, short-term memory loss, a huge issue in younger and younger populations. Part of that issue is the hippocampal damage that's occurring due to the drug therapy that's being put on kids at a younger and younger age, because a lot of the drugs that are used induces oxidative stress and actually causes a very similar pattern to Parkinsonian symptoms. So everything from antidepressants to attention deficit drugs actually deplete the mitochondria, and somebody's talking about NADH and how NADH affects the substantia nigra. It's because it fuels complex 2 in the brain, and that's what fires the mitochondrial respiratory chain in the brain and allows you to make dopamine, and so you can focus. So as long as I take enough Adderall, get my caffeine sprinkles, make sure I take my Prozac tonight to bring me down from my Adderall, I'm going to be pretty good until I can't remember to do any of it. Because that's what's going to happen at some point. Now, is there a fact that people may need a medication? Okay, I'll give them that. But you know what we're not doing? We're not giving them the neuroprotection if they have to be on that medication. So what neuroprotection do you need to do? What's the cloaking? What's the protection? What do you do? That's important. So we'll get to that. And then, of course, it's just feeling emotionally flat, feeling overcommitted. I do a lot of polls on people. I feel it's important to find out, how do people feel? How do people feel is a really smart way to go. I'll give you a great example of this. I know I told this story last night, but it's one of my favorite stories. And of course, craving patterns, because their serotonin and dopamine are burned out. So it's like, I love that chocolate-covered potato chip. You remember seeing chocolate-covered potato chips in the U.S. market in 1960? No. Why do we have chocolate-covered potato chips? Chocolate-covered everything. It's the ultimate comfort food, right? You get starch, fat, salt, and theobromine for your dopamine. I mean, how much better can it get than a chocolate-covered potato chip, right? And how many people are it's a drug. It should be a scheduled item, right? You should need a script for a chocolate-covered potato chip. But let me tell you a story about, asking simple questions. So I get a call, and this is like one of my, actually I use this story because it's just so classic of medicine today. This all-star baseball player has got GI problems, and he's been scoped and scanned and imaged, everything you could possibly do to find out what's wrong with him. And so the doc of the team doc calls me up and says, hey, this is, so-and-so, team doc, Cincinnati Reds, is there any way you could see, our star player, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, well, you're going to have to come in on your day off, because he doesn't want to come in when there's other people around. Okay. And we're going to have to pay. I mean, it is the Cincinnati Reds. Okay. Remember, we were talking about they never want to pay. Pro athletes never want to pay. It's an honor to work on them. I'm telling you, it's an honor. I felt so honored, especially on a Saturday morning when I had to miss my kid's baseball game. So anyway, he comes in, and I said, okay, so you've got this epigastric pain. Nobody can figure out what it is. Let's start with something simple. You've been scoped, you've been scanned, you've had MRIs, CTs, MOUSCs, you've had it all, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, okay, so what do you eat for breakfast? Because since your stomach hurts, maybe it's something you're putting in your stomach. Well, I eat 5 bowls of cereal. Okay, that might not be so good, but let's just leave that one alone. What do you do next? Well, I drive to the baseball park. What do you do on the way to the baseball park? Well, I get 3 Red Bulls. Actually, I buy 6. I drink 3 before I get there, then I got 3 in the car for the way home. Okay, so 3 Red Bulls. Okay, that's just 100 grams of sugar. Don't worry about that. And maybe 600 milligrams of caffeine. No big deal. So let's go on from there. What do you do when you get to the ballpark? Well, I got it. I train for about 12 hours. Really? Do you hydrate? Oh yeah, I hydrate. And I drink all day. What do you drink? Well, we've got one of those. You just push the button and water comes out. I said, yeah. Well, it's not water. It's mellow yellow. Mellow yellow is like Mountain Dew. It's just called mellow yellow, right? And I said, yeah, really? So how many of those are you drinking a day? The 16-ounce cups, right? And he goes, well, let me think. And he had the jello brain look. 32, about 32 16-ounce mellow yellows a day. And then let me correct this. And then what do you do on the way home? Like I really have to find out what the problem is now. What do you do on the way home? Well, I stop and I buy a large pizza and I drink those 3 Red Bulls. Man, I can't figure out why your stomach's bothering you. I think we got to get your head scanned. That's what we got to do. So obviously we had a little bit of a problem with sugar and caffeine causing a little bit of epigastric distress. But you know what? Nobody asked the man with stomach pain. See, I didn't ask him about his childhood. I didn't ask him about any past lives either. I just asked him about, what do you put in your stomach? Nobody bothered to ask the guy. So sometimes your answers are allowed to be simple. They don't always have to be complex. And that's another, I guess, I hope I will leave out of here, and it's a popular message, that sometimes your answers can be simple. All right? And so I rebranded the word metabolism. I took it upon myself to say, I think there's a different definition of metabolism, right? Because metabolism is traditionally, what? The rate of caloric burn, right? What I think metabolism is, it's your cellular vibe. It's your vitality. It's a dynamic process. How you felt last week, how you feel today, and how you're going to feel next year is all around what's happening to you at a mitochondrial level, what's happening with your cells, and what's going on in your metabolism. And it's really the sum total. Like right now, going on right now for you, if you're tired, if you're sleepy, if you're jello brain, or if you're just all super vibrant and healthy. You're jello brain? I said jello brain and you said me. No.
I want to know what happened to the ball player.
What happened to the ball player? He actually, he did really well. He corrected his diet. He got back in. He got traded from the Reds, became a big all-star, and it's probably worth like a couple $1 billion right now. And I had to do it for free, so I don't know. Where's the justice in that? So anyway, he did do very well. We had him back on the field. We just kind of, it's really weird. We had him drink water. It's so strange. Hydrate yourself with water. It's a weird concept. So the point being here is that everything that's going on for you right now in your body is driving your metabolism and how you feel. Whether you're efficient at getting rid of fat or not, whether you're making inflammatory compounds, whether you're making plasminogen activator 1, PIA1, whether you're making fibrinogen, whether you're making C-reactive protein, how much you're making, all those things are happening simultaneously. But that is creating who you are today. And it's creating who you're going to be in a year, in 10 years, and in 20 years, right? Because we know, for example, diabetes doesn't happen overnight. Cancer doesn't grow overnight in most cases. You get an acute exposure. I tell you what, there's some things that are instant, right? If I took Curare, Turbo Curare, and I injected all of you with Curare, I would have a bunch of paralyzed people right now, and it would happen pretty instantly, right? But short of that, right, short of acute exposures, you hit a telephone pole, God forbid, but you hit a telephone pole. That's acute. And that's what emergency medicine's great for. But other than that, your metabolism's dictating everything. And what the goal is understanding what disrupts your metabolism. We had a great discussion before about emotions and how emotions and beliefs can drive your metabolism. Think about it. If you think of a smell, something that maybe when you were 5 years old you smelled. Like I can tell you what's great for me. I can still remember running into my grandmother's bar and grill and lodge, a skeet shooting lodge in Upper Pennsylvania. And I would run up the steps and I would make a hard left, right? And my grandmother was actually a fingerless, toeless, blind diabetic. Before I could hit the door and say, "Hey, Grandma," she knew who I was by my footstep. She goes, "Jimmy!" My little Italian little old lady, right? Now, she freaked me out because she wanted to feel my face, and I'm like, oh, God, I never want to have diabetes, right? But the beauty of that is I still remember the scent of the lodge. And if I get a scent of walking into a lodge, like you go on vacation, you go to a lodge and you get that scent, I'm taken back to my grandmother and all that love, right? So if I can have that, that's very powerful, right? It's the same thing, right? Emotion, memory, all those things can make an incredible lasting effect on us, both positive and negative. But in the end, the big thing we're trying to do is we're trying to say, well, what's going on? These disruptors in our metabolism, what are they shifting, right? So what they're shifting is, first of all, is our rate of oxidative stress. And I love talking to Bern because I can always rely on, Bern gets the scoop, right? And so he's been talking about, he was talking about cancer cells. We're talking about cancer cells. And normal cells are supposed to have oxidative stress. Cancer cells are the best defended cell that your body makes. It's the highest cell in glutathione. It is the best antioxidant-rich cell that your body makes. And so oxidative stress, there's a balance to what's called ox-phos relationships, oxidative phosphorylation, how you make energy. If you get too much oxidative damage, it damages your tissues. If you're not having enough oxidative phosphorylation, same thing can occur. You start to change your gene switches. You can have more inflammation. Sex hormone imbalances can occur. Just look, when I went to Austria last year and presented at the International Men's Congress, and 95% of that conference was about testosterone, because finally we're figuring out that men have andropause. Women knew it. It's like, well, he's grumpy, he's disinterested. In fact, he can't even find the remote control anymore, so I have to find that and find the channel for him. And right, you can't lift things. Men are more prone to fractures. There's all kinds of stuff that happen. But there is and for women, we've known it for a while, right? As your estrogen goes away, you have the same heart disease risk now as men. More women die than men after menopause, and they've got a lot of estradiol to protect them before that. So hormones can shift. Glucose and insulin, if you looked at the longevity studies, it would say that stress hormones, so cortisol, and glucose-insulin relationships are the two primary hormone fluxes in you that cause aging. When they did the primate studies, the primates that lived the longest had the best glucose-insulin counter-regulation methods and had the best pattern of cortisol to DHEA ratios. Now, when we start to talk about that, it'll make sense. I mean, I know I don't have a lot of time here, but a few more minutes.
No, go ahead. We got plenty of time.
Got 20 minutes, yeah. So the point being is, I'm not going to tell you that when I wrote the Metabolic Code book, and I've written subsequent additions, chapters to it, and now getting ready for a big volume revision on it. It ended up being a textbook for a lot of different organizations. And what it's really doing is trying to organize all this complex information and saying that symptoms and lab values show progression in people. So, for example, I want to get right to the slide just to kind of get to that point. So, the point of being a diabetic. This study was done 5-6 years ago, and nobody is talking about this study yet. And it drives me crazy because my whole family is diabetic. I mean, every male over the age of 50 on my father's side of the family, and it's a big Italian family. I mean, probably 400 living relatives in the U.S. I don't know how many are over in Italy, still in Calabria. They probably don't want you to know they're even there. They're probably a part of some, secret team or something. Who knows? But anyway, the point being is, they're all diabetic. 46,578 members of Kaiser Permanente study, right? So it's a Kaiser Permanente Northwest, had a fasting glucose level of less than 100. My point being, in medicine, that's normal, right? And so they acquired people for 3 years. Anybody that had a normal glucose, you're allowed to be in the study, but you could have never been diabetic, and you could never have had insulin resistance. So you have to be a just diagnosed normal glucose person, right? And 46, everybody kind of tends to look at studies and go, well, that's not statistically powered. I have trouble with 47,000 people being tracked not being statistically powered, right? I mean, you got a lot of people here. So, the subjects were assigned 1 to 4 categories. Blood sugar under 85, 85 to 89, 90 to 94, 95 to 99. Every 5 points up to the high end of normal. And they were followed until they developed diabetes, not good, died, a really bad way to leave a study, and then left the health plan, and they did this until 2007. So this is a 10-year study, right? All people in normal ranges of blood values. And the reason I'm bringing this out to you is what I believe in it's easy for me to find somebody who's already got an illness. All I got to do is look at their lab value and go, you got a blood glucose of 220, you're diabetic. The real art to it is that if you've been in practice a long time, I know some of you have been in practice a long time, you know that what really is the subtle piece is that people say, man, I am tired midday, and I am drinking a lot of water, and my brain isn't thinking as well as it used to be, and I do have belly fat, and man, my legs cramp up, and but yet I go and I get a blood test, and the doctor says, here's the classic. You get a phone call. Now, labs are all normal. Well, what's normal? Normal's okay. You're A-okay. You're A-okay normal on your labs. That's what you get. You don't get, well, you're trending high or you're trending low. What does it mean when you're trending within a very normal range on this particular subset of data? For every rise of 1 point above 84, there was a correlated 6% increase of developing type 2 diabetes over the next decade. So when you're at 90, you have a 36% risk. When you're at 92, you have a 48% risk. You know what you're told when you have a 92 blood sugar when you walk into a doctor's office?
Everything's fine.
How are those Reds doing this year? You're typically not told your risk ratio. Another one, potassium. So you get a serum potassium. If your serum potassium is below 4.5, you're 4 times at risk to have diabetes in the next decade. Why? Because as I'm insulin resistant, as I dispose of glucose more inefficiently, my potassium leaves my serum. It gets urinated out. And so the point being is that trend analysis is where we need to start to think about to be able to show early disruptions in what's going on with us. Don't wait until you got a glucose of 125 to figure out you're diabetic, right? When you're at 92, and where do you start to damage your eyes, your kidneys, and your vasculature? And when you have a blood sugar above 90. So you have damage to your tissues. They showed in 47,000 lives, you damage your tissue at a glucose of 90 and above. You know what happens when you don't sleep enough at night? What happens to your morning glucose? It goes up. 60% of Americans don't get 7 hours of sleep a night. We wonder why there's so many blood sugar disturbances in our culture. Obviously, the environment has an impact, right? Phthalates, we know, cause diabetes. Arsenic causes type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of things that can go on and do that. This is a book that I got to write a chapter in that was, other than me, and I mean this with all sincerity, I'm not being coy on this, it was like the leading researchers in cancer chemistry wrote chapters in this book. And I got lucky because the editor, this Dr. Zenker, who was a MD, double PhD in oncology and immunology. He at University of Witten in Germany, and he was big on the Warburg effect, which is how a normal cell becomes a cancer cell, right? So a normal cell will say, okay, glucose, you can come in, but hey, take your time. You can't burn too fast. Don't burn too fast. As you have excessive oxidative damage and you have deficiencies in things like thyroid hormone, or somebody mentioned sirtuins. We were talking about sirtuins. Sirtuins activate what's called a signal substance called PGC1 alpha, peroxidome proliferating factor 1 alpha. PGC1 alpha is the co-activator for just about every major neurotransmitter and hormone in your body. As you age, and when you gain weight or you start to have a higher percentage of body fat, you turn off your ability to make PGC1 alpha. So what's that mean? As I turn that off, now my cell still wants sugar, right? I still got to have glucose. But what's it got to do? Man, we can't use that GLUT4 transport. It's not working. You got to carry that through slow. It's broke. Why is it broke? Typically not enough thyroid hormone, not enough PGC1 alpha, not enough chromium, my insulin receptor doesn't want to signal. There's a multitude of reasons why your insulin receptor starts to have a defect. Genetics, VDR3 genes, if you want to talk about gene SNPs, that's fine, we'll throw those in there too. Bunch of reasons why it's not working good anymore. Stress. We're going to go in the back door. We're going to go through what's called GLUT1. And what that does is that turns on that active diffusion of glucose into your cell. And the active, so you know when you go for a cancer test, right? You go to find out, they want to light up a cancer cell in you, right? They want to scan you. What do?
Scan.
They do a scan. And what do they put in your body?
Glucose.
They put glucose, it's radio labeled, right? Why? It goes into, the glucose is taken up 50 times faster in a cancer cell than a normal cell. And that's because a different gate has been opened up due to your metabolomics to allow that glucose in fast. The problem is with the speed of that glucose comes a lot of waste product. So your lactate levels go up and your pyruvate levels go up. Well, what's the response to that? I got to pump the lactate out of my cell. And when I pump the lactate out of my cell, what's it do? It causes intracellular acidity. And then what's that do? Well, the pH of my saliva starts to go down, the pH of my urine starts to go down, and more importantly, I start to make space for the next generation of cells that are going to divide. So, when you have diabetes, so here's my story. A 90 glucose is the beginning of this. Because when you have diabetes, you are inefficient at glucose regulation. And we know that as you have diabetes, you turn on the switches that lead to oncogene activity. So when you're a 92 glucose, you're a 94 glucose, it just depends how badly you want to get to that end result. Hey, I don't need to eat as well as I need to. I don't need to try to improve my chemistry. I'm kind of still normal almost, not really after tonight because I know it's a 1% risk or a 6% risk for every 1 point, but I'll store that in the back of my head. From now, you gotta realize these things are a time sequence. It takes years for this to happen in most cases. So, and then of course other things happen, right? Glucose and Alzheimer's, right? Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes now, right? That's what it's called, you know, if you look in the literature. Cortisol, or stress hormones, and Alzheimer's, dementia. High plasma cortisol levels associated with rapidly increasing dementia. Why did I introduce cortisol just now? Stress. What's cortisol doing? What happens when you run from a white tiger? What do you got to do? You got to put glucose in your bloodstream, right? When I stay up too late at night, my cortisol levels have got to kick up. Why? Because my brain has to be active. I always get a kick out of it. I really do like sleep, and if I'm under really stressful situations, I'll force myself to sleep with I'll take enough melatonin to tranquilize an elephant. I really don't care. I'm asleep, and I've got a great antioxidant floating around in my bloodstream. It's okay, I'll take it. But the point being is that we do a lot of counterintuitive things to help us go to sleep. Like at night, if you work a 12-hour day or 14 hours, you're out. You're here, we're under lighting now, or you're going to go home, and you know what people do? They turn all the lights on in their house right away. Right? Yeah, let me look at the light on my phone. Let me look at the light. I'll turn the lights on in my house so my pituitary can say, oh, hey, stop that melatonin production. It's daytime. We got to go. Right? Here's your normal diurnal rhythm of cortisol, right? At about 6 a.m., it starts to peak. And then your body, as your serum level actually is trailing, the serum is highest up here. But what happens is that you're using stress hormones during the day, but by night, you're supposed to have physical repair, right? Yeah. This is 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Now, what happens if I decide not to go to bed till midnight? I lose half my repair cycle, right? Because I'm repairing from 10 p.m. to 12 midnight. That's when I'm filling the vesicles in my brain. And then I wake up at 3 a.m. because I'm under a lot of stress and I don't have enough melatonin and my glutamate levels are too high in my brain. So I'm excited. I wake up thinking about what I've got to get done. So there's no repair process. So what do people say about how they feel in the morning when they don't get a good night's sleep? My brain feels like it's totally in a fog, right? What's the next thing that happens? Well, then medicate yourself. Let's give you Ambien. What's the problem with the drugs that are related to insomnia? They elevate your GABA pool. GABA is great because it makes you feel, anti-excited, but it doesn't make you go into alpha stage sleeping. So you can't go into a deep sleep. And so people that take drugs like benzodiazepines, like Xanax or Ambien or, Ativan, whatever, benzodiazepines for everyone, right? What happens to their repair cycle at night? What's going to happen? It isn't going to ever start to occur. What's a common complaint of people that are on those kind of drugs? Amnesia and memory loss. So that's what's going on. All right? It's important. So here's the thing that's going on between your adrenals, thyroid, and pancreas under chronic stress. I told you about the metabolic code. For me, what I did was I tried to group things so people can understand your body works in systems, and then they work by crosstalk. So your adrenals, thyroid, and pancreas talk together, and your gut-immune brain connection. You're going to have a great lecture, I guess, on the gut-brain connection. Fantastic. The cardiopulmonary neurovascular system. The more stressed out you get, and your vasculature starts to squeeze down, and you have more sympathetic tone in your brain, what happens to your cardiac heart rate variability? It goes down. Why? Because my primal vagal tone gets disrupted, right? So now my autonomic breath is gone. It's a progression that takes place. That's why people start off, like all you gotta do, I started off in behind the counter, counting pills in inner city Cincinnati. And I watched people with their chemistries. Oh, I need one more. Yep, you start off, I got you on Lipitor. Oh, you know what? Now you're insulin resistant. Let's put you on some metformin. Now you got blood pressure problems. Let's get you going on an ACE inhibitor with maybe some hydrochlorothiazide in it. Well, because that hydrochlorothiazide is depleting magnesium, you got arrhythmias now. We'll put you on a beta blocker and a calcium channel blocker. Well, now your mood's kind of flat because your CoQ10's all depleted, your magnesium pool's low. We're going to have to put you on antidepressant. You're aching a lot because your antioxidant defense network's down because of all the drugs you depleted. Now I got to put you on some ibuprofen. Oh, none of that's working and you're still sore? Oh, well, it's time for prednisone so we can really dampen your immune response. Look, that's the cycle of drug therapy. By the time you're a teenager. But that's our cycle, right? So it's this whole thing of, it's this thought of perceived stress and environmental stressors that affect our brain. If you're in Lyme disease, you talk about Lyme. Lyme and its family of pathogens has a dramatic effect right here. So you get people who get an infection and all of a sudden they get neurotic. Or you can have people that get chronic exposure to things like mercury, right? Mad as a hatter, right? Hatters would use methyl mercury to press a hat. They'd smell the vapor. Mad as a hatter, right? And so environmental burdens, infection, things like excessive iron damages the brain, right? Major life events, trauma, behavioral responses like fight or flight. We induce fight or flight. And so, it's very easy to see. I'm thankful that I think I figured out how to manage my stress, and it really just takes good potato vodka. But it really, honestly, people don't take the time to do an autonomic reset in their day. When am I going to breathe deep? How am I going to breathe deep? When am I going to just realize that it's all beautiful, right? Because we get so wired up into, oh my God, did I answer all the emails I had to? And the emails! I didn't send the pictures to my sister about the birthday party. Oh my God. Is she going to live? It's not the end of the world. Your phone didn't work for a couple hours. Okay, good. Grateful for that, right? So those are the things. And of course, we have this whole thing of allostatic load, meaning how well and how long can I adapt to stress? I remember one of my most classic cases was a 4-year-old, well, she was 4 at the time. She was in a concentration camp in Croatia, and then was here as an adult as a psychotherapist. Couldn't get well. Couldn't get well, and she was fully self-actuated. She was doing some serious psychotherapy work. I mean, cool vision work for other people. I sent a lot of people to her. She did amazing stuff, but she had a pretty tough belief system drilled into her at a very early age in that concentration camp, right? That allostatic load was heavy. And of course, we talk about this whole thing of your adrenals causing, alterations in serotonin. And here's why your brain shrinks under stress. As you deplete DHEA because you're making cortisol, low DHEA, obviously low melatonin means you can't sleep, but low DHEA, when they scanned people's brains and they saw that they were losing volume in the hippocampus, it was because their cortisol to DHEA ratio had shifted. So they had a lot of cortisol and not a lot of DHEA left. DHEA is neuroprotective. You should definitely get your cortisol and DHEA measured and make sure that you're not in the highest quartile of cortisol and the lowest quartile of DHEA. That means your brain is shrinking. Interestingly, you can have as high a cortisol as you want, but if your DHEA pool is optimal, you get no damage. So the only time you get damage is when the DHEA pool drops and your cortisol is high, and you literally get hippocampal shrinking. I mean, these kind of stress and obesity studies, you guys know. These are interesting, right? We talked about weight, and you guys may have seen these studies, I don't know. But 4 hours of sleep at night, their leptin went down 18%, their adrenaline went up, their hunger goes up 24%, their carbohydrate cravings went up, especially for sweet, salty, starchy, high-calorie snacks. This was a Stanford School of Medicine study here in 2004. Maybe some of you participated in this study, I don't know, right? So, 1,000 volunteers, those that average 5 hours of sleep, less leptin, more ghrelin. So ghrelin means I eat, leptin means I'm satisfied. Their BMI went up 3.6%, right? The results were regardless of the subject's diet and exercise habits. It didn't matter how well you were eating, you could have been calorically restricted and you still gained weight. Because your hormones shift and are driving the dysfunction. That was the whole thing about, kind of a lifetime fitness thing that I did was, weight loss is more than calories in and calories out. It's about your biochemistry. It's about your metabolism. This was the NHANES 1 data. Those that averaged 5 hours sleep a night had a 73% likelihood of increased obesity over those that slept 7 to 9 hours a night. Wow. So a lot of times I like to give basic information to people to understand. Okay, so I'm going to ask the question, that I ask every question. How many people in the room get 7 to 9 hours of restful sleep a night? Raise your hand. I got about half of you. How many get more? Nobody raised their hand. That's good. Yeah, there is too much. Yeah, there is too much. Yeah, we've seen that picture somewhere, right? Have you ever been that person, right? On this film, this isn't going to work. I wish this video worked on the PC, but it was put on my Mac, so it's not going to work. But you gotta look up the house episode. Put house asthma episode. It is so funny because this lady who looks very sophisticated says to House, "My asthma medicine's not working," and House goes, "Oh, really? Well, sometimes doctors need to do a better job and have to evaluate your case." And she went, "You didn't fix it." He goes, He goes, "What?" And he said, "Well, how long is your medication?" I said, "Oh, I ran out of it. I just got another one." He goes, "Really? I want to show you, how do you do your asthma medication?" So it was an inhaler, right? She gets it out and she goes, "See, it didn't help me." So you do have to know how things work. You don't believe some of the things I saw when I was in the pharmacy. Interrupted sleep reduces fatty acid oxidation 52%. This is a small study of 15 people, but interestingly, in this study, you burned fatty acid oxidation, so you didn't burn fats, was dropped in half with reduced sleep. Pretty simple stuff. So, and then I want to talk about the brain a little bit, just real quick. And I'm just going to use this slide to do it. Your brain is supposed to regenerate, right? You've got stem cells in your brain. And we know now that even when you're older, you regenerate neurons in your brain. You can rejuvenate your neurons. But what stops this from happening? A lack of sleep. And that's exactly right. When you have, and what do you think are the receptors on here that tell this cell to not go to its progenitor cell? It's called NMDA and cortisol. So two excitatory compounds. If you have excess amounts of them in your body, it attaches to the stem cells of the neurons of your brain that is generating your fully differentiated synapse. It never gets to here. So when they say chronic stress, causes a lot of problems, they're right. It causes a lot of problems. Stress and sleep disruption suppresses adult neurogenesis. And here's the thing, guys. It's a lasting inhibition. So if you don't stop it, you have to stop the excessive cortisol. Then you have to do things that help to regenerate the neuron. Oh, let's see this circuit board. This is an important circuit board. Stress is up here. Here's your brain. Stress hits my brain. It tells my spinal cord to increase sympathetic output, right? More epinephrine, more norepinephrine. What happens when you release norepinephrine and epinephrine? Your vessels do this. What's the next thing it has? So blood pressure's going up. Then it stimulates peripheral, what's called corticotropin releasing hormone, which is releasing cortisol. What's that do? It changes the permeability of your intestine. So when you talk about the gut-brain connection, when you get under stress, your brain tells your body to release more cortisol. The cortisol releases more histamine. Your gut gets more permeable. You release more mast cells, which cause more chronic inflammation. And now because my bowel is leaky, I start developing food allergens. So yes, our gluten is we have GMO wheat here, and we have 50% more gluten. But you know what? 1950, people were eating Wonder Bread and apple pie, and, right? Were we having all these problems back then? We weren't having all these problems back then, right? Well, but people, well, you know what? Wonder Bread was made with love, and they had good commercials. That's what that's about. Look how many people went after Hostess, man, when they got shut down, right? We got to have you back. We love our King Dons and our Twinkies and our little ho-hos and ho-ho-ho, right? But here's the problem, is that today, because of excessive sympathetic stimulus, right? I'm not sleeping as much. I've got to drink a lot of caffeine to get through my day, right? I've got adrenal exhaustion. I'm cranking out my cortisol. I know after my 12-hour day, I got to go work out for an hour or two so that I can get home, and I've got to watch Dancing with the Stars, even though I should be getting in bed. I mean, my gosh, I got to see Winona dance, or I got to see whoever's going to dance. Oh my gosh. And then how many people develop adult food allergies? Okay, and for those of us, I went to school in 1960. I was in my first school class in 1964. All right? I don't remember anybody having peanut allergies. I lived on a jar of Jif every third day. Right? It wasn't a problem then. It isn't. Look, the problem is this. It's not just that the food is toxic, because I agree. Heavily chemical burdened food is not good. No doubt, eat more whole food, non-GMO, get back to the source, dig it, I'm in. But the problem is, we're the problem. We're the reactive species. We need to fix our wiring. We got to get all that excessive sympathetic drive out of us if we want to be successful. This is what it should look like. Stress hormones in the morning, goes down at night. This goes down, melatonin goes up. That is not a good sign for cortisol release. That's that person that, 10 o'clock at night. What are we going to do now? there anything else we can do? I really think there's like I'm on my 5th movie. It's like 3 in the morning. I really think that maybe I can watch one more. Or then there's this. Now there's 2 reasons to that, right? I could either have been at that high level for so long that now I've got adrenal failure. I'm not making any hormones anymore. Or it's interesting. You hear of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? People with PTSD, their brain, because it was such a fright, their brain has preset their tolerance to cortisol that low. Meaning that, so think of a PTSD person, any little bit of disruption in their existence, right? Anything out of they've got to really normalize and standardize their day. Because when a pebble gets thrown in their pond, what happens? Total deconstruction, right? I mean, and the reason for that is they think when that little bit of chaos hits and there's a bump in cortisol, that they're reliving their experience. Their brain thinks they're reliving their trauma. And so it's a fight or flight response, right? So I'm going to close with this so I'm done right on time because I know I got other speakers that have got a lot of things to share with you. Stress, right? 8 years later? 8 years. Just 8 years. Here to here. Now, interestingly, I want to talk to you about something here real quick. I want to finish with this thought here. The Cardia study in 2006. They looked at 718 black and white middle-aged men, 6 salivary cortisol examples. Persons with a cortisol slope score in the flattest quartile had the greatest likelihood of any coronary calcium than those in remaining quartiles. What's that mean? The more flat my cortisol is, the more flat, the less that I have a circadian rhythm, right? Up in the morning, down at night. The more I flatten my slope, the more likely I am for heart disease. It doesn't even matter if you're overweight. The most correlated thing was stress response and the flattening of the cortisol slope. Now, why is that important? Cortisol actually demineralizes your bone. And when you demineralize your bone, you plaque your arteries. It's a well-known correlation. All right? So, anyway. Interesting stuff. I'll show you one more thing, and it's on this study on training. So you think people with training are healthy, right? 304 amateur athletes, bunch of women, bunch of men, all under the age of 40. So for me, it's way too young. 70 controls that did hair cortisol, self-reported measurement of exercise, 42% increase in their cortisol. But look at this: cycling, 10K run, half marathon, triathlon, marathon. Look at the raise in cortisol. Now, look at the volume. When they're training for their marathon, people get out, they're 40, they just got a divorce, they want their self-esteem back, right? I'm going to train for a marathon. When I get to 120 kilometers per week, look at my rise in baseline cortisol. 220%. Wow. And of course, people die doing marathons. And if you don't die, you'll get fibrosis 13% of the time. You'll create damage to your inner chambers of your heart about 13% of the time. Not so good. And so the point being is that there's a sweet spot. I'll end it with that. There's a sweet spot for us that we need to recognize. And there's some age-old things that I can tell you this right now. As long as I've been doing this work, nobody likes to hear me talk about getting adequate sleep and managing your stress. I mean, and I can tell you, I can recite biochemical pathways in a pretty skippy way. I've been at it a long time. I've studied them a lot. And I can tell you a lot about botanicals and all kinds of different things that you can use to try to help correct your chemical imbalances. But if you don't get the basics right, like look at your blood glucose, look at your B12 status. Are you anemic? If you're anemic and your glucose is high and you're not sleeping, take all the pills you want. You're still going to be in an accelerated rate of damage. That was the beginning of my talk. Who am I now? Right? Metabolically, what is my blueprint? Who am I now? and where am I going? And you do have the power to totally change where you're going. But you gotta take that step. And you gotta be real about it. And you gotta assess who you are, where your weaknesses are, be honest with yourself. And when you're not strong enough to do it yourself, find help. You know, lean on people you love. But you gotta start with being honest with yourself. So I'll leave it at that. I'm 3 minutes off. Sure.
10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
So if anybody has any
Glad to.
questions, have Doug put it in the microphone and just speak in there, and maybe James will
Okay.
answer some questions.
Have you heard of PACE training? PACE?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Sears's book. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think interval training is excellent. I think the thing, if you want to really get into that, the demarcation point on training at intensity, even at interval or not, is at about 1 hour. So some people will do interval training and they'll do longer an hour. It still starts to create damage. So you think about under an hour on any type of interval training. Pace training will typically be 12 to 18 minutes. Sometimes I think it's a little too short for overall benefit, right? But it certainly is good at heart rate variability training and causing some nice nerve growth factors and growth hormone release. So it's a valid way to train.
Just regarding that, Al Sears sent me the book to review. In fact, I'm one of the reviewers in it before it came out. And so that pace training is I do agree with a lot of what he's saying in there. You see people on the treadmill, an hour. That's not what you want to do. You want interval training, shorter period of time, maybe 20 minutes on the treadmill, elliptical, but not this 40 minutes, hour on the treadmill. Don't
Right.
do that. So.
Go ahead.
Next.
How do you detox patients from Ativan or drugs like that? I have someone who's been on it for a long time. She's in her 80s and she's really addicted to it now, but wants to. When she takes melatonin, it doesn't do a thing for her. Nothing really helps. She's eating pretty healthy, and how do you shift someone who's been wanting to change, especially somebody who's older?
Okay, so Ativan's very tough to get off of. I mean, this is a drug that withdrawal can be very difficult. So what I do is I first find out what's the least difficult time of day for the person. If they're doing it, are they doing it just for sleep? Sleep only. So the interesting thing on sleep is that most people have trouble with sleep because their brain is hyper aroused from the day. So it's called hyperarousal of the HPA axis. So what I would do with her is I would want her to do theanine, and I'd want her to do maybe something to lower cortisol like holy basil, or there's a plant extract of philodendron and magnolia called Relora that I did some clinical trial work on that dampens cortisol. So I want to dampen her cortisol a day. And I got to tell you, something that I do with melatonin, which is now finally in the clinical literature, but I'll dose people at 20 milligrams of melatonin. And see, everybody goes, oh my God, are you kidding me? You have to remember what is going on. People, when their cortisol levels are high and they're a highly sympathetic drive, it's like they have a megaphone telling their brain to stay awake. And so what I'll do is I'll dose them at a high dose of melatonin, and I'll ramp it up until they get a night where they sleep through the night. And then I'll start to back it down right away because their brain has now recognized the signal to melatonin while I'm dampening their stress response and sympathetic drive during the day. And I reset, because the only thing that resets cortisol circadian rhythm is adequate melatonin in your brain. It's the only thing known to reset the cortisol circadian rhythm. And so you dose up, and then I take them down off of it. And I'll have people off melatonin altogether within 4 weeks when I use that protocol.
James, I've seen there's some studies on with people with cancer who, as far as melatonin, taking 50. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Absolutely. We use 20 in our pediatric cases for our autism cases or spectrum cases. It's not,
He blew me away with 50 milligrams for cancer.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
what would you do for a 21-year-old girl who can't leave a bedroom because of constant migraines?
Wow. So I need to, I mean, the first thing I want to know is if she's on birth control pills. And if she's on birth control pills, I want to know what her estrogen to progesterone ratio is. If she's a 21-year-old and she has a really low progesterone, progesterone is what coats the myelin sheath of the brain. And so if her estrogen to progesterone ratio is off, it causes crazy migraine activity. And the electrical conductivity changes when the myelin sheath is not neuroprotected by progesterone is unbelievable. So progesterone would be one. I need to understand the rest of her history. If I'm thinking through it, I'd be gut, because does she have gut issues that are triggering a gut immune brain interaction where she's got excessive glial cell activation because of that? The third thing I'd think right away would be, you know, what's her magnesium status? But I'd be going to progesterone right away. Thyroid could do it too. Yeah, you could see thyroid too. Yeah, I've seen so many women with progesterone being the trigger for their migraines. It's crazy. Low progesterone, right? And yeah, definitely. And if she could be a polycystic ovarian case where she's low, you know, she's low progesterone. There's all kinds of things that could be the situation.
What time do you recommend taking the melatonin?
It's interesting. They actually did studies in athletes where they gave it to them a half hour before they trained, and they found out they recovered better, and they did all this stuff. But the problem is they had to put beds in the gym. But I have them do it a half hour before bed.
And what time should that be?
Well, it depends on what time you want to go to bed. I mean, for me, it's like clockwork at 9:30. I go to bed between 9:30 and 10. I happen to take a lot of melatonin on a regular basis because I happen to think, you know, I do everything possible to whack my melatonin cycle out during the course of the day, right? I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm in front of a computer, I'm training, I've got a kid I'm trying to manage. If that's enough to send your brain into a tizzy, right? It's like, you know, so it's melatonin. And so ideally you should be in bed by 10 p.m. just like that cycle says. That's called the Shen cycle. And you know, Chinese medicine's been onto it for 5,000 years, right? It's nothing new. It just got validated in Western medicine. Or I'd say Western medicine took the story from the Chinese. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
If someone's adrenal insufficient and during their peak time of tiredness, like the standard afternoon,
Yeah, at 2 p.m.
The heart rate starts going up. Can we assume that the adrenal is just accidentally kicking out epinephrine?
It's not accidentally doing it. It's doing it in order to maintain consciousness because you need epinephrine in your brain and you need enough adrenal hormone in order to drive sympathetic activity. So what it's doing is it's more or less, you can think of a car that's running out of gas and it starts to spurt. You know, your adrenals are somewhat, you know, in that state. So you'll kick out epinephrine, norepinephrine. Now, if your heart rate's going up, that means that your vagal tonicity is out. So, you know, that's where you have to think about. I don't know if you've done much of the kind of the meditative deep breath where, you know, tongue to the roof of the mouth and, you know, you do deep inhalation, you know, in through the nose, out through the mouth, and that starts to retrain the vagal tone, and that usually will get heart rate to go down over about 6 weeks. And then taurine, because most people are adrenally fatigued or low in amino acid taurine, which drives heart rhythm, and you know, a couple basic things like that. Magnesium, you know, you'll be in good shape.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you had an opinion on whether the rise in cortisol and blood glucose level that happens during low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets is harmful the way that it is for us.
Good question, because I have an opinion on everything. I think that, so ketogenic diets, or at least low carbohydrate diets, it's interesting when you look at them. Typically, it is a transient rise in glucose that occurs. And but what bothers me more on people that say on sustained ketogenic diets is the fact that if they don't get any resistant starch into their lower colon, that their enterocytes start to die off and they get what's called the release of endotoxin. And endotoxin actually circulates and attaches to organs and tissues and triggers NF-kappa B and causes all kinds of inflammatory pieces. So glucose is usually transient. Cortisol typically transient. T3 will go down, so your thyroid hormone goes down in people that are on lower carbohydrate diets. But not everybody works well on, I mean, if you're on a ketogenic diet because it's seizure activity or it's a cancer case, that's one thing. But if it's not cancer or seizures, then I don't like people being on ketogenic diets, actually. I think they cause some inherent problems. I mean, with gut, you know, so you might not be genetically compatible with it and your cortisol could stay sustained high, and you can make a lot of low particle size LDLs, so.
So what do you think about Gary Tubbs, and he's basically anti-starches, and
No, he's not totally anti.
he's,
You know, I think here's the way I would put it. I mean, look, everybody's got their thing on diet, and so I've got a staff of 5 dietitians that read the literature, and we're very focused on what works in people. And so what the issue once again isn't how many starches you take in a day, because people were eating Wonder Bread and apple pie in the 1950s and they weren't having problems like we're having today. I'd say that the issue is that because our insulin receptors are so gunked up because of environment, stress, low nutrient density, all these reasons we talked about all comes down at that insulin receptor, that low carbohydrate diets work well for people, right? It gets them to get their weight down. But what we're seeing is that the real sweet spot where you don't see real problems in inflammatory signaling is in what's called a modified low glycemic load moderate carbohydrate diet, in which the carbohydrate intake is between 60 and 100 grams a day versus the 50 and below a day. The 50 and below a day definitely induces endotoxemia. That's been shown repeatedly. And if you can tolerate more, and more of a carbohydrate intake, more than 100, you're exercising or genetically you're not predisposed. I take in more than 120 carbs a day, I'm getting fat, and it's all around my waist right now. I can tell you, I'm Italian. I'm just diabetes waiting to happen, right? So everybody's a little different in what they tolerate.
I think the latest with Gary Tubbs, he's made an important shift, because in his book after his main book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, he talks about the fact that in Asian cultures people have
use the microphone.
they rely on rice, and they therefore have what we call the high carb diet. But and so he's shifted now toward the view that sugar is the problem. That it's a certain kind of carbohydrate. It isn't all carbohydrates. It's sugar and in particular fructose. And I think
I would say that too many carbs and too much sugar is bad. If you eat, look, let me give you a great culture. India. Nobody eats more rice than India. Who's got the highest level of diabetes culturally in the world? India. I mean, you can't eat tons of rice and not end up with diabetes. So it's that thought of moderation.
They eat a lot of sugar too.
Yeah, they do, but I mean, we've looked at this pretty thoroughly. Excessive carbohydrate consumption is going to drive higher glucose, higher insulin, no matter how you cut it. I mean,
I don't think so.
That's great, but I've got about 30,000 patients that I've looked at and I've watched them, and I've seen their glucoses go up. So if you've been tracking patients, I'll be right with you, but I've seen it. So
Related to that, I've been in practice over 20 years also. Have you ever seen a truly healthy, full vegan person?
no,
Me neither.
never,
Yeah.
not once.
Okay.
In a morgue. Yeah.
Healthy. Couple of questions in here. What would cause a thyroid to be markedly small? And in the assuming no radiation, and in the context of cancer, where you also have to cut down on your carbohydrates because at least the simple ones, the carbs feed the cancers. And then
So
looking at thyroid.
you will get less active thyroid, not so active that your thyroid should shrink, but typically if optimal T3s at say like 3.1 to 3.4, you'll see an average range of like a 2.6 to 2.9 T3 in people that are low carbohydrate. They won't go into a full swing low T3 unless they have other issues that are around it. but they'll go to a moderately lower T3 because they don't need it. If your mitochondria doesn't need to burn as much, so your T3 expression goes down. It's not a bad thing.
If someone is not low carbohydrate and they have a markedly small thyroid,
The markedly low thyroid number, or their thyroid is small.
the thyroid itself is small.
Yeah, I think of either it isn't nutrient deficiency. It's usually radiation, or it's some kind of poisoning. Yeah, autoimmune thyroiditis could do it.
If you're lacking selenium, that will do it too.
Yeah.
Selenium
Yep.
is very important with thyroid and vitamin A.
Yep.
So if you're deficient in that, you need to raise it. I
Yep.
think we got about a minute, and then we want to get 5 minutes break, and then start with.
So one more question.
And this one will cost
5 cents.
donation.
Who wants the last question?
Okay.
Okay. When did you have? Because he has.
Well, we gotta get the next.
Okay, one more question.
You talked about the breathing. Now, was that with the tongue on the roof of the mouth? Was that in through the mouth and out through the nose, or
In through the nose, out through the mouth.
Okay,
In through the nose, out through the mouth. Tongue planted on the top with a soft palate.
thanks.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a 5-minute break.